Okay. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Hill Country. My name is Karen Burkett and I am your worship associate this morning. We're pleased that all of you are here with us today to worship and celebrate. I have an echo.
I turned off his microphone for the moment.
Yeah.
Y'all are close enough that you're getting feedback from each other. So
I don't believe, oh, there's Chuck. I don't believe we have visitors today, but we would be thrilled if we did and welcome them. And also, if I know others may be watching this later, either on YouTube or something else, and we're glad that you have chosen to take a look at us and hope that you will come back again. If anyone has an announcement you would like to make, please wave your hand and Justin will turn on your audio and signal you.
okay, Jill, just a second, please. Go ahead, Jill.
Well, this is an offer. I don't know, those of you who follow me on Facebook know that I've had struggles with the pool all summer, and it is now perfect and wonderful. And it sits unused 23 hours a day. So if anybody would like to come and swim, I will leave it for you to have a private swim if you would like. We don't have to interact. I can unlock one of the gates so that you don't even have to come through the house. Just contact me privately and we'll set up a time. I just hate for it to be unused because it's really nice now and it's very hot now.
Okay, and Linda, just a second there.
Under Sandra.
Okay, Linda, you should have a, there you go.
I just want to give a plug for the coming attractions. For the next 3 Sundays, we have 3 services that will be graciously shared by our members that are very much about finding your identity in UUism. The first one is the humanist in me, the second, the theist in me, and the third, the Christian in me. So if you can, don't miss any 3 because it's a very interesting look at ourselves.
All right.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay.
Although the church doors are not open yet, the church expenses do continue. Right now we are getting ready to face an extraordinary expense very soon because the church has a broken water line and it must be replaced before we can turn any water on. So your support is both greatly needed and greatly appreciated. As our chalice flame is lit, please hear these words. Let us be a faith that gathers, reaching for one another through walls of hate others build, through cages of ignorance and arrogance, and through fear that burns city streets. Let us be a faith that sees a vision of a better world, more compassionate, more just, more holy, and with more love. But first, let us be a faith that worships together here this morning in all these spaces. At this moment, let us be a faith.
Yeah.
At this time, please read and speak with me our church mission statement and then the affirmation of our covenant to each other as Justin puts them on the screen.
second.
I can't read it all. Can you?
Yeah, but on mute.
We journey together,
Together,
guided by
our
UU values, to seek, nurture, serve our loving church family, our community, and our world.
See all that?
Mhm. The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. And this is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, as we strive to have all souls grow into harmony with the divine. Mike.
Thank you, Justin. Says I'm still on mute, am I?
We can hear you through Karen's microphone. Do you want to swap so that it's coming through yours and we'll get less echo?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second here. You should have a prompt to unmute yourself now. Okay.
Kind of like that cartoon, isn't it?
Yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna cut all of that out because any of the YouTube videos I can't use on our video. I'm just gonna put links to them in the comments. So I'm gonna cut everything up to right about here.
Oh, okay.
Not a problem.
This is a presentation. You are still muted. I mean, on. You can mute yourself.
She can keep hers open. She just needs to turn
Now
her
it sounds
turn her
right.
speakers off.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a presentation by the Reverend Dr. Rebekah Savage. I think you've seen in the church newsletter her background and accomplishments. It's actually a presentation given in October 2017, but I think it's still relevant. I played this moment over and over again in my head. The day I heard of the Thomas Jefferson Ball hosted by the Unitarian Universalists in 1993. As a person of color, raised in a UU congregation, I felt a shiver down my spine as I learned something new and unsettling about the faith that I call home. You may be wondering why this gathering of UUs in 1993 struck me as a memorable and painful moment. Beloveds, this is why. Attendees were encouraged to wear period clothes to the ball to celebrate Thomas Jefferson, who attended Unitarian churches and was a supporter of the Unitarian faith. In the spirit of welcome, those who conceived of this social gathering did not take into account the centering of whiteness by asking people to attend in period dress. The organizers forgot or ignored the fact that in Jefferson's time, we black and brown UUs would have been slaves, property to be traded and sold, brutalized and subjected to physical pain and deprivation. The matter was actually taken up at General Assembly when delegates challenged the appropriateness of the event. During a plenary session, delegates voiced their concerns by reading a statement of protest. In response, the organizers and other leaders gathered to consider how to proceed, and they came to a decision. the Thomas Jefferson Ball would proceed as planned. I asked myself, what would I wear? Would I be a house slave favored for my lighter skin and good hair? My skin is a light brown that my daughter refers to as cinnamon, a product of a beautiful multiracial family history. Would I catch the eye of a white man who could leverage any opportunity to take my body as his property? What would I wear? Would I have had shoes at all on my work-worn feet? Would I have stretch marks across my belly from babies that were taken from me later to sell to other plantations? Would I sing to myself faithful, mournful songs of liberation, dreaming for the day when I can taste freedom for myself and my family? What would I wear? Would I be allowed to come through the front door, or would I be directed to the back to enter through the kitchen where the other slaves and servants were directed? Would I be allowed to drink from the same punch bowl? Would I be allowed to eat from the same platters and the same table? Would I sit with other people of color in a separate room or at the back of the gathering? Would I be permitted to look at a white person in the eye or even speak their name? What would I wear, beloved UUs? Tell me, what would I have worn to this ball? What period clothes would represent who I am and who I would have been in Thomas Jefferson's time? Ouch. When we feel something deeply and are still struggling to find the words, ouch, ouch. Why do I raise this deeply wounding moment in our shared UU history? Because this isn't just a reflection about my lived experience as a person of color in a majority white denomination. This is also part of the story of how people of color experience sharing worship and community within our faith. It's a chapter in the story of who we are as a people living in this country, swimming in the waters of white supremacy and centering whiteness, supported by centuries of indoctrination and institutional structures. I grieve for the hurts that this time in our UU history caused. I grieve for those who left our communities because of how this event was handled, which broke their trust in finding spacious rest in our congregations from the pervasive, violent racism in our country. I grieve for those who at the time were unable to traverse the gaps in their spiritual understanding of justice and belonging. I grieve that it has taken this long to have this level of conversation about centering people of color. This ball was conceived by well-meaning people, beloved kin of yours and mine, who were able to identify welcome only through the eyes of white privilege. That is the insidious nature of centering whiteness. It denies personhood and the God-given right for all to be fully accounted. To put primacy as the default setting, primacy on whiteness as the default setting in how we see and experience our world, means that we are being theologically inconsistent. We covenant to affirm and promote the interdependent web of all existence of which we were a part, and yet we have devalued the full inclusion of too many. In small ways, this trend emerges when music and readings for worship draw primarily from Anglo-European composers and writers, and the paintings that hang in our congregations and sanctuaries disproportionately represent our white foremothers and forefathers. We see this trend when congregational leadership is cultivated without honoring the diversity in our midst as a rich source of inspiration and prophetic messaging. We see this in considering that people of color have been part of our living tradition for centuries, but our voices have been overlooked, silenced, or outright rejected with hostility. I ignite my flame of justice and shine a light on this scar because the healing is not done. The healing is not done because we are still called to do the work of dismantling white supremacy culture and decentering whiteness from our bones, from our congregations, from the ways in which we interact and support each other. We are called to fulfill the promises once made in the name of faith and proclaiming beloved community. We are called to match our words with our actions, to bring the holy into our midst by truly and without fear, honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This is a beautiful time of opportunity. Beloveds born of truly listening to people of color and beginning to repair the fabric of community that has been torn, ripped asunder by years of broken and empty promises, words of good intention, unmatched by purposeful action. Now, I love being a Unitarian Universalist. I was birthed into this world with a calling of service on my heart. I was shaped and molded in our congregations. I also know that, as Dr. Cornel West shared with us in his 2015 Ware lecture at General Assembly, if I have white supremacy in my heart because I was raised in this country, so do we all. While I grieve, I also have much reason to claim hope. I celebrate where we are as a people of faith because we are bravely facing the devastation and illness of othering people. We are looking at ourselves in the mirror and seeking a new way. I celebrate that we have the moral and spiritual courage to listen deeply to voices that have been marginalized. I celebrate that beloveds are choosing to move back humbly, to make space for an evolution in leadership and consciousness. The spark of working towards the greatest good is seen in every moment of insight as many are waking up to our participation in centering whiteness. Beloveds, now is our time to lead with love and make right our ways, that the denomination has fallen short of our shared principles. We are a powerful, aspirational, covenanted people, and we are being called to account for our historic moral and spiritual failings in order to move into authentic beloved community. Now is our time to harness our ability to reflect inward in order to re-emerge with a power greater than ourselves that gives rise to a new day. Beloveds, with love and peace in our hearts, may it be so. Now, in song and words, hear what is truly being said to us by our faithful people of color. Justin?
Thank you, Justin. Now, let me play devil's advocate for a little bit. The message, I think, is pretty clear. But the Reverend Dr. Savage says that people of color have been a part of the UU living tradition for centuries. She also says that our Black voices have been overlooked, silenced, or outright rejected with hostility. Finally, she says that the paintings that hang in our sanctuaries disproportionately represent our white forefathers and foremothers. I believe she is engaged in a little bit of hyperbole. I don't mean to be a white apologist, but I put this to you. Unless I've missed something, all of our UU history and all of our forebearers were white. We played the 6-part series, A Long Strange Trip, in our church twice, all about the history of UU. Not once, until we get to the 1960s and 70s, not once was there a person of color shown to be in any position, time, or place of influence in the UU faith. I don't think the guy who made this series purposefully ignored people of color. There just weren't any. The UU faith had its origins in Eastern Europe, in white Eastern Europe. It moved across Europe to Western white Europe. It jumped the channel to white England. It moved across the Atlantic to white America. And that's the rub, folks. In other words, Reverend Savage is correct when she says we have white music, white writings, white readings, white philosophy, white thinking, white culture. And that's because it's the UU DNA. So what do we do? Especially, what do we do as a congregation? Equally important, when do we do it? We have no audience to play to. Where do we as a congregation find the motivation to do something and then continue it as a part of our fabric? And remember this, here in Kerrville, our largest population of color is Hispanic. Do we begin by inserting Hispanic music and culture into our church culture first? And I don't mean by singing De Coloris once a month. I'll leave you with this question. Is Unitarian Universalism even suited for diversity, given the predominant emphasis we have on reason, self-introspection and thinking, and rational processes, all of which are white-based? Let's see what you think. It's time for Talkback.
Okay. All right, Susan, let me get to you on the list here.
I want to just say thank you, Mike. Very powerful. Thank you for sharing this. It's something I've been thinking about for some time. In fact, I even brought it up to you a year and a half ago. I said, I have to do a sermon. I'd like to do a service on racism. And what I was saying is that the name of the sermon was going to be, I Am Racist. Inflammatory. But I began to realize that the way I was brought up UU, but even then, white centrist thinking was starting to question it. And I'm so glad that did that this morning. And I appreciate you. Wow.
All right. And Janet, let me get to you 1 second, please. Go ahead.
Right. While I don't have any facts to back this up, I can't help but be curious about people of color in UU history that were there, not necessarily in any position of leadership, because that would have been obvious, but were there doing the work without the credit. And the reason I bring this up is that some of the same things that the devil's advocate, Mike, said this morning was said about women. Women didn't do anything in art. Women didn't do anything in science. Well, it turns out they did. It's just that men took credit for it. So I can't help but wonder if that same thing is true to some extent or another with our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Just a thought. Again, I don't have anything to back this up. I can't point to something and say, see, this is the truth, because I don't know. But it did occur to me.
By
The
that
other
same
thing that occurred, let me just real quick finish this. The other thing that I struggle with is how do we, and how do I personally embrace the heritage that comes to us as humanity through people of color without cultural misappropriation? Where's that line? It's hard for me to find that. Thanks.
All right, I'll get to all you. I just wanted to add on to what she was saying. You know, the looking at it in context of science. We had that movie recently, Hidden Figures, about the women involved in all of NASA's endeavors in the 60s. And even I was involved in things NASA related. I went to space camp in 1991. Never heard a word about any of this stuff. And just in the last few years, all of this has come into light. So I believe Stephanie had her hand up. Let me get down to you here on the list.
Yeah, so Janet said a lot of what I was thinking. Actually, in the series, there are a few women that show up in the history of UU. And a lot of them are working for abolition in the United States. And it seems to me that in working with the abolitionist movement, there would have been other people of color that we were interfacing with. And I'm pretty sure that there's a history of some of those people somewhere. If we could dig deep enough, we would find those women or men of color. But of course, the problem is, as you say, I mean, they're covered up, by the great man theory of history, which we have all subscribed to, until very recently. I wanted to say that when we got to Kerrville, it's been a year now, one of the things that we were really hoping for was sort of more interaction with the Hispanic community. And we're still trying to, because of this stupid pandemic, we're still trying to figure out how to interact with anybody. But we are in a neighborhood where we are surrounded, we have Hispanic people right next door and right across the street, and we have African American, Black families just down the street. And I think when we can all kind of safely come out of our houses, I mean, we know our immediate neighbors, but I do feel like there's a real opportunity here for Unitarians to reach out, to people besides those who look like us, and have this particular history. And so I've been hopeful about that, and this has been on my mind too, just like Susan said, for quite a while. I also wanted to, because David probably won't do this, I'm gonna mention that David actually taught a long seminar with Cornell West and at Oklahoma, and they came and stayed. Their kids came and stayed at our house, and anyway, we know them pretty well. So I was really glad in the sermon that he was mentioned, because his kind of version of spirituality mixed with the political has been very influential on both of us. And this is just such a frustrating but enormously important time. And I'm really, really glad, Mike, that you brought this up. And I'm glad that you challenged us with these questions. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay. And give me just a second here. Okay, Vicki, you're up next, and then Carolyn, and I think Sandra had her hand up too. I'll get to you too as well.
Thanks.
Vicki, go ahead.
Yep. I think it's possible for us to have conversations about white centeredness and as well as the dominance of male ideas in our culture, even if we cannot directly influence immediately the diversity of our congregation. I think it's important to separate those two ideas. We can talk about how we think and how our culture gives us thoughts among ourselves and in conversations like this that Mike has brought, without having a particularly diverse congregation. And it's really important that we do that. I also just want to mention that the Quakers are having much the same problem. They also have, as Mike said, white DNA, and they're struggling with the ideas of class, race, and inclusion. And I hope that our UU denomination can learn from them a little bit. That's all. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, Carolyn, let me get you up 1 second.
I was a member of the UU Church in Arlington, Virginia for the years that we lived back in DC. And it was a 700-member church. It was huge. And they had actually been a physical sanctuary during the Iran-Contra time when all the people from Central America came. I mean, there were people, refugees, living at the church. So they were very involved. But they despaired. They tried for the whole time I was there to attract. They had a handful of people of color members, a handful. And they tried for years to attract people, and it just simply didn't work. It didn't work for the people of color, the community. Now there was a huge church, a UU church in DC itself, and they obviously had Black members, but our church just despaired. They tried and tried and tried and tried. So it is, it was a very real problem.
Okay, Linda, I'll get to you next. Sandra had her hand up a moment ago. Let me bring her on. Sandra, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I don't think the problem is that Unitarians don't want to have Black members. It's just that we're different. First of all, we are not evangelical. I grew up in the Baptist church where they would pick neighborhoods and go out and knock on doors and invite people to come to church. Another thing is that our services are more formal than most of the Black churches, and it just doesn't appeal to Black people very much, unless it's the higher educated people. I went to the church in Fort Worth, First Jefferson UU, and I know that the Burketts went there too. We have one Black member. And as the neighborhood changed, the church is becoming surrounded by a Black neighborhood now. But I don't know that they've gotten any more Black members. Maybe they have, but there's a difference in culture. Also, most of the Black people believe that Jesus saves, and they're not really interested in our philosophies. But there again, there are some who will be, so I don't think we need to give up. But I can't put all the blame on the Unitarians. I think they're wonderful. I think people have different needs, different interests, and we're in one of them. I love the Black music. you know, the gospel music and everything, but we're not doing that. So I think maybe that's why we don't attract Black members. That's just my take on it.
All right, Linda, you are up next.
I don't think the challenge for us and the conversation we're having today is about getting Black members to our congregation. I think the conversation and the challenge that Mike has issued to us is to think about this and how we live our lives and how we discuss things and how we act. We may never have Black members. That's not the issue. The issue is, what do we do to open up ourselves and have these difficult conversations about how to do it?
Okay, let me turn my Mike's microphone back on here just a second.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, in response to your statements about trouble finding some history, if you'll go to the UUA website and you keep digging and digging and digging, it's hard to find. There is some history that you can find there. There's actually some original reports that you can find. I did find one report that actually listed, I think it was 15 ministers. I don't think they were all ordained, but I think 15 ministers of color that were called Unitarians between 1900 and 1960 something. Only one of which I think ended up associated with an integrated or white church. Most of the other ones, I think, well, couple of them may have gone to actually Meadville, but most of them, I think, were sort of self-proclaimed, but none of them had congregations that included whites. But anyway, if you'll dig in that site, you'll find some history. The other comment that I've got is to follow Linda, and that is, it's not so much, I think, having members in the church, but it is acting as a congregation. And as a congregation, taking steps and moving forward into the community. The UUA itself will admit that until the 60s and late 60s, they as an organization and most of its churches were awful when it comes to race. They were as Jim Crow as anybody else. They struggled, and they did not, as a denomination or as churches, step out until probably shortly around the time that Martin Luther King started really becoming in the news and in the forefront. But I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to step out as a congregation and in the name of the congregation and do things. That will more likely attract people to the church than anything we do in a service right now. That's all.
All right, Mari, you're up next, and then Meredith will be after that.
Yeah, I just like to say that I think one way we can start, and I completely agree with Mike and Linda, we can't bring these people in our doors, no people we can't bring in our doors that don't want to come. But we have to open our own hearts. And one way to do that is through music, through literature, through reading, to have groups where we explore Black experience through those venues, which are there in proliferation. And my husband said to me when I first met him in 1950, and he was already involved in civil rights disobedience, he said, racism is in the DNA of white America. And that's just true, you know? And so we have to start with a very deliberate, very conscious effort to hear. And that's just what I'd like us to do, especially when we can get back together again. Thank you.
All right, and Meredith, you should have a prompt now.
Yes. When I was raised in a very Protestant church, it was interesting at that time, and I guess for a long time, until the civil rights movement, even after that, there were white churches and black churches. There was no effort being made in the Seventh-day Adventist Church to combine them. I understand that isn't true now. About 3 or 4 years ago, I had the great pleasure of going to Tulsa for the UU Music Ministry Conference in the summer. And of course, Tulsa was at that time the largest church in the US, the largest UU church. And as most of you know, I'm sure, from articles in UU Journal, etc., the church welcomed a black minister and a number of his congregation. I understand that they have built a church downtown now and things are a little different, but at that time they were holding 2 services, and the large choir that sang for the Sunday service, there was one song that we did not sing for one service and one song that we did not sing for the other service. And the first service was the celebration service. They have a very large keyboard organ and a fabulous black musician who plays it, and the music is simply wonderful. We had this for some of the meetings in the evening. It was just exciting and wonderful. And then the 11 o'clock service, as I remember, was the traditional service, which was mostly I believe all white. And we did not do that music, but we did a song in Latin that we did not do for the celebration service. I thought that was very interesting, and they were handling it the very best way they could, because they had a number of black members who came with the minister. So there are some interesting things, and some cultural some cultural fixing, so to speak, that I'm sure that some of the churches are having to do. But when you go to a black church, and it's too bad that it is this way, that it is a black church and not a mixed church for everyone. The music is fabulous and the people take part. And it is somewhat the same way in a Pentecostal church, that is a white Pentecostal church. And my parents used to always say, you can't convert a Pentecostal into a very straight-laced religion because it isn't any fun. And they have such great fun going to church, singing and being elevated to holy and doing all of the things, and it just isn't exciting in a white church, in an Adventist church. So you can convert everyone but a Pentecostal. That's all.
All right, Linda, let me get you back on here. And then Stephanie will be up next.
I would like to recommend a book about UU history during the civil rights movement. It was written by Reverend Gordon Gibson. It's called Southern Witness, and it deals with the history in all of the UU churches and how they responded to the civil rights movement. And in some cases, it was brutal. The congregations disassembled. They could not agree. In other cases, they took extraordinary efforts to support the Black movement. Reverend Gibson himself was also at Selma as a very young man. He also took a part-time ministry job in Jackson, Mississippi, to follow on the minister who had been shot, because the UU Church opened up to Head Start. It was the first beginning of Head Start, and they could not find a building, and they opened up their building. The minister was not killed, but it frightened him, and he moved his family out of the South. And Reverend Gibson took that ministry. It happens to be where we came into UUism in 1974. But it's an excellent book on the history of UU churches in the South in the civil rights movement. And it sees how we were thinking back then.
So I don't know how these things work in this congregation yet, but it occurs to me, just an idea, and there's a lot of things to think about here, but would it not be possible for the congregation to put out a statement in support of Black Lives Matter, or maybe something a little broader than that? I don't know where it would go, in the paper, or I don't know, but just to kind of let people know, like, where we stand, that this aligns with our values and what our values are. I don't know. I mean, it's just a thought. So there's a lot to discuss about that, I'm sure, but just throwing that out there. Thank you.
That's an interesting, a couple of things about UU churches in the South. My family's in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the last time I was there, I went to the UU church, and they were having a workshop before the regular service. And it was one of those, with big boards and, who are we, what do we stand for, and so forth. And I thought it would be a great way to get to know people personally. And one of the people in the group was a Black woman. And I think she was like on the city council or something, and this, wonderful Black woman. And she said, she had been a member of the Tennessee church for a long time. And she said she was so tired of every time she goes to church, people rush up to her and they say, "We're so glad you're here. We're so glad you're here." And she said, "I've been a member of this church for 20 years, And it was just, it was like, she felt like in some ways like the token Black person. And I mean, it's kind of the other side of the coin, and Stephanie, we do show up. We wear our little yellow shirts, our Standing on the Side of Love, and we have been to many protests and demonstrations and the meeting at the Doyle Center and stuff. We do. And that's what, my thing is, show up, just show up,
All right, Jill, you're up next. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Stephanie, just for your information, First UU Church in Austin has had for many years, I think since probably the Ferguson situation where Black Lives Matter really became a slogan, they have had a huge banner at the entrance of the church for years. The only problem is First UU Austin is at the end of a dead-end street, as so many UU churches are.
All right. Anybody else? Stephanie, let me get you back on there.
Sorry, I don't mean to take up so much time, but I just know that when we've had conversations with people here about, because everybody wants to know what church you go to in Kerrville, right? So you tell it, and they have no idea. Like, there's this glazed look. And And so, you know, I think it would just be interesting to just sort of put us out there, you know, in a way that here's what we believe, right? Here's who we are. I don't know. Maybe other people don't, you know, they want more privacy than that or something. But I mean, I just think it would be cool to say, these are our principles, and if you see us out on a street corner, this is why, you know, and people in the Kerrville Daily Times will write nasty comments in the comment section, but yeah, well.
Of course.
I just wanted to say in response to you, okay, thank you. We do have a way to respond. Since you're newer, we have wonderful cards, and I carry them in my purse. And when I do have a conversation, I just hand them a card and say, well, since you don't know about Unitarian Universalism, here's a card that explains our basic values, just so that you understand, since some people think we're a cult or a sect. And I say, no, we've gone back, you know, our religion is thousands of years old, and here you go. So when we're together again, Stephanie, maybe you could put those cards, we have them available.
All right. Okay, Meredith, let me get you back on. You're on, Meredith.
It always seemed very strange to me that being white, that if you are a very small amount, even in some places a minuscule amount of Black family, then you are Black rather than white. And some people see it the same way with Asian and Hispanic, etc. But not in our lifetime, but certainly in my children's lifetime. I think that our country will be mostly all mixed race, and some of these issues will be a whole lot different.
All right. Okay. All right, Karen, you're back on. I think we've come to the end of it.
Thank you. As we extinguish the symbol that we have of the flame in our chalice, hear these closing words. Let us be the ones who do not tread lightly in this world, but light it up with our love, who hold up the mirror of worth and dignity